All right, so we're on to the third practice ACT English test, passage 1. It's called A Literary Magazine, and if you skim through it, what this is about is just the process of what they do to accept submissions and put their magazine together, and it just kind of goes through that whole process. It's not really anything that interesting, but at least it's not difficult to understand. All right, so 1, whether or not wanting to work for Fairground, you have to be willing to push yourself. Okay, there's 2 problems with this. First is logical, the other is grammatical. The logical problem is that do you have to be willing to push yourself whether or not you want to work there? Even if I don't work there, I still have to push myself? I think it's good to push yourself in what you do, right? To do a good job or to stay disciplined and focused. But this is about if you want to work for Fairchild, you have to be willing to push yourself. It's not, there's like a choice here, but the way this is set up, it makes it sound like no matter what you choose, you have to push yourself. And so that is not right. The other problem is that it shouldn't say whether or not wanting to work for Fairground. It should say whether or not you want to work for Fairground. It's an incorrect use of the term. It's an incorrect use of the term wanting. So that does not work either. If you go to B, if you want to work for Fairground, that makes sense. It's very simple and straight to the point. It doesn't have those logical or grammatical issues. What about C? Wanting to work for Fairground, if you do. I mean, the problem here is, first of all, it says if you do. It's kind of just wordy in a way that it doesn't need to be. Like, why don't you just say if you want to do this? Why do you have to separate it out and say extra if you do? It kind of makes it a bit confusing. And then it's also an improper use of the word wanting. I mean, perhaps you could say wanting to eat, some bread, I race to the kitchen. But in those cases, it would be more geared towards specific instances, whereas this first sentence is more about if you want to do that or if you want to do this. And so it certainly would not work here. And then D, having decided whether or not you want to work for Fairground, this is the same thing, that logical issue. Also, I've said a bunch of times before that whenever you have the word being or having, it's usually not the best way to put something, and you should be very suspicious of any answer choices that have that. This clearly does. So the only answer choice that makes any sense is B. All right, number 2. The editors of our triannual literary magazine is kept busy all year. All right, this is a subject-verb agreement where they separate the subject and the verb to confuse you about how they agree. All right, so you have to have this subject editors, which is plural, and what is the verb? Of our triennial literary magazine is a giant prepositional phrase, meaning you just eliminate it from your mind, or you can just cross it out because it's really not important. The editors is kept busy? Well, no, you need to be saying, and you need to say are kept busy, right? That way you have subject-verb agreement. So which one actually makes sense? Are kept. Keeps is also singular. And then has been is singular when it should be plural. Okay? All right, moving on to question 3. Let's look at it. Our office fills up with subscription forms and flyers that we must sort, bundle, and tote to the post office to be mailed. All right, is there anything actually wrong with this? No, there's nothing wrong with this because there's a good separation between this part, we must sort, blah, 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 and the subscriptions for the flyers with the relative pronoun that, which means that all of this stuff is basically just a long modifying sentence for flyers and subscription forms. Well, what do we do with subscription forms and flyers? Well, we have to sort, bundle, and tote them to the post office to be mailed. So there's nothing wrong with this. There's no weird punctuation that you need with the word that. All you do is just say it straight through, no commas. So No change seems to be right. If you actually look at B, C, and D, they all have the same problem. Because there's no relative pronoun, there's no that or anything like that, all you have is flyers, comma, these, we must, like a new subject, right? These, and then that with a new verb. So you have a new independent clause. So you basically have a full subject and verb independent clause, and then another subject verb independent clause. Well, if you have that, you need a semicolon, or you need a comma and a conjunction to separate the two at least. Well, you don't get that in any of B, C, or D. So B, C, and D are all run-on sentences. The only one that makes any kind of sense is A. No change. 4. Which choice should the writer use to create the clearest and most logical transition to paragraph 4? All right. Well, for the prior paragraph ends with them having to sort through all this stuff. It says we read and evaluate hundreds of manuscripts. If they read hundreds, well, then what does 4 say? Some offerings are scrawled in pencil. Others are expertly typed. And then it goes on, some are like this, some are like that. Well, is there anything wrong with this? No, it's just describing the different kinds of submissions that they get that they have to sort through. Some are like this, some are like that. Some are, not really professionally or formally written, and some are very well made or very properly submitted. So F seems to be perfectly fine. What about the leaves fall faster than the manuscripts piling up on our desks? The leaves fall faster. I guess that's like a reference to fall. It's probably someone trying to be very cute with their writing, but here's the thing. This whole thing is sort of redundant, isn't it? Because what did they already say? They have to read and evaluate hundreds of manuscripts. If they're already reading hundreds of them, that's a lot. Do you need to say the leaves fall faster than the manuscripts piling up on our desk? I mean, I guess what they're trying to say is the only way this would actually make sense is if we have so many manuscripts, it actually is there, we get more of them than the leaves fall. But this even flips it. So what is the point of saying the leaves fall faster? There really is no point. So G just doesn't make sense. It's redundant, and it basically just has this weird sort of attempt at being clever that doesn't work. All right, H. You can imagine it's different from back in August. Well, if you notice throughout this passage, a lot of it was written in the third person or in the first person, meaning third person like they, the editors, or first person, our. Okay. But what does H do? It switches that up and adds this weird second person tense you. Okay. Typically, you want to stay consistent with the tenses and the point of view that you're writing with. And so H doesn't do that. And why do you need to say you can imagine it's different from back in August? Isn't it better just to describe what's going on? Why do you need this? Well, you could imagine it's different from this time. Well, why would you even really imagine it would be that much different, considering this passage is sort of in the beginning phases of, the paragraph is only the fourth paragraph. It's just completely unnecessary. And it also doesn't really describe as relevantly what goes on in the paragraph. It just says it's different, but it's not specific, okay? So F is the most specific, the most relevant, and it doesn't have any kind of redundancy. What about 5? All right. Some offerings are scrawled in pencil. Others are expertly typed. So a semicolon, what that does is, if you guys remember, it separates two independent clauses. They can be two independent sentences. They just have to be related. Are these related? Yeah. The only problem is that you have a comma after others. That's separating the noun or the subject others from the verb are. Do you say I, comma, like eating? No, I just say I like eating, right? Well, this separates the subject and verb with an unnecessary comma there, and that's the mistake. So which one works? Which one actually resolves that? C, pencil, semicolon, others. Straightforward. If you have B, pencil, others, you have a run-on sentence. You have a noun with a new, you have this noun, and then you have this new subject and new verb. Run-on sentence. And D, first of all, this so doesn't make sense because so means as a result of. This is not about as a result of. It's not like others are typed because some are penciled in, right? And if you read it, it says, some offerings are scrawled in pencil, so others, comma, are expertly typed. It's arguable whether you even need that comma even there at all, okay? You actually don't. So there's a grammatical error, and then you have this logical error, so that is certainly not correct. All right, number 6. Given that all are true, which of the choices creates the most logical and appropriate contrast in this sentence? All right, number 6, what does it say? Some arrive with letters proclaiming the writer is genius. Others may be written even more illegibly. Okay, so this first part is saying some manuscripts, they have like, hello, my name is Bob. I'm amazing, and my writing is so incredible, awesome. Just, oh, I'm so great. All right? And then this second part says others may be written even more illegibly. Well, first of all, even more implies that that first part has to do with being illegible. That the writing is just difficult to read, it's poorly written, and that's not the case. And what does is there a clear contrast, a clear opposite relationship between being written poorly and, writing in a way where you're just bragging the whole time? There isn't really a clear contrast. Just because they're different doesn't mean it's a contrast. What about G? Can't appreciate how much work our editors put in. Is there a clear contrast between some people saying, look, I'm a genius, put this in your magazine, I know, maybe, because the thing is, those people could say, I know your magazine is great, but I'm a freaking genius, I'm awesome, okay? There isn't really a clear contrast between a lack of appreciation for the editors and some people just talking themselves up. What about H? Come with apologies for taking up our time. That actually could work. Why? Because if you have some people writing in saying, look at me, I'm awesome, and then some people saying, I'm so sorry for taking your time, I hope you read this, I put in a lot of time and, I'm not sure if it's any good, but I know you're very busy, that sort of thing. You have basically opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of the types of people who send in their manuscripts, okay? What about arrive folded up and dog-eared? Being folded up and the way it's wrapped up and stuff is not a clear contrast or a clear opposite relationship with some people basically bragging about themselves. So the only choice that makes any sense is H. All right, 7. If you read 7, we base our decisions only on the work itself. Actual typesetting will come later. The editors, blah, blah, blah. What is this paragraph about? It's about the process that the editors go through to choose what goes in the magazine, okay? The selection process. And it talks about all the different types of letters they get and, all of that. What does actual typesetting have to do with it? Typesetting is like typing it out, making it look nice. It doesn't really. It's basically talking about a separate part of the magazine making process and putting it right in the middle of this paragraph. So you might as well just say something about the aspect of, what we do when we print this stuff, how we have to send it to the printers. Well, that's part of the magazine making overall process, but not specific to this actual sorting and selection, okay? So this is sort of just an interrupting, come from nowhere, random, irrelevant sentence. and it really should be omitted. The other clue is that if you look at choices A, B, and C, they're all grammatically correct, and there's no real issue of redundancy in the way they're written. So what is the problem? They're all exactly the same. If they're all exactly the same, probably none of them are going to be right. So D is the only one that's different. D is the correct answer. What about 8? All right. The editors agree that every issue has to be good and has to reflect. All right. If every issue has to be good, is there any problem with that? No, every issue has to be good. Just make sure it's good. You know? No problem there. It's very succinct, straight to the point. What about more good? Well, more good compared to what? And then if it's more good, that's not actually a grammatical phrasing that makes sense. You have to say better. So G doesn't work. What about positively well? Well, first of all, it's a little wordy, isn't it? Can't you just say well or, very positive? But the other thing is, well is an adverb, and it's talking about the issues having to be good. Issue is a noun, so it needs an adjective like good. Well, as an adverb, can only describe other adverbs, adjectives, or verbs, and so grammatically there's a mismatch. And then here, this is overly wordy, and it also has that adverb problem, okay? As in, well cannot modify issue. Good can modify issue because good is an adjective and issue is a noun. So in this case, no change. What about 9? And has to reflect and show the varied diversity of the United States. Well, if it reflects, doesn't it already show? That's an issue of redundancy, repetition, wordiness. So A cannot be right. Oh, look at B. Wow. Reflect and show the cultural diversity of multicultural. Wow, this is just a mouthful of redundancy and repetition. You have reflect and show, and then you have cultural diversity, multicultural. I mean, can we be any more redundant? What about C? Mirror and reflect. Well, if something mirrors, it already reflects. More the same. What about reflect the cultural diversity of the United States? You don't have, diversity basically said twice. You don't have reflect said twice. This is straight to the point, and it doesn't have extra words. So in this case, D is the correct answer. Okay, on to question 10. So it says, within their policy, that's plenty of room for discussion. All right, the first thing that really sticks out is this word here, there. And this is an issue of homonyms. Homonyms are words that are spelled differently but sound the same. You have they are, contraction form there. You have T-H-E-I-R, which is the possessive form. That's like the plural form of his or her. And then you have T-H-E-R-E, which is pointing to location, like over there. Well, is this a within they are policy, or is this a possessive situation? It's actually a possessive situation within their policy. His policy, her policy, within their policy. You could say within their policy, that's plenty of room for discussion. It is a little better to say there's plenty of room for discussion, but the critical error, again, is this part, okay? So no change obviously does not work. What about G? Our policy there is. Wow. Within our policy, there is. If you say there is, that should be T-H-E-R-E. Right? There is plenty of room for discussion. I know I write like a 5-year-old. I'm sorry. But H, that policy, theirs. Within that policy, there's plenty of room for discussion. Same issue, it should be there, but in this case, maybe there. That's what they're trying to say, theirs, but they use the wrong form. And J, that policy, theirs. There's nothing wrong with J at all. J completely makes sense. Within that policy, there's plenty of room for discussion. So, does that make sense? All right, 11. There's plenty of room for discussion, and editors have to be ready to sprint the distance favoring their choices. Okay, this is where people are kind of using analogies or metaphors, and they basically don't really know how to use them. So, have you ever heard of the phrase go the distance? Well, you say go the distance, you don't really say sprint the distance. And if you say, and editors have to be ready to sprint the distance favoring their choices, well, let's figure out what are they probably trying to say. They're probably trying to say these editors have to be able to defend what they want to choose, because it's not just one editor, it's like a group of people sitting around saying, well, I like this one, let's put this one in, and some people saying, oh, I disagree. And if you want that in there, you have to be able to defend it. Okay? So sprint the distance is an improper use of that analogy, go the distance. But in this sense, it's just poorly used. The only way you could say go the distance is if editors have to be ready to go the distance in defending their choices, not favoring their choices. Because you can't really favor your choice more. You can defend your choice more, I guess, more intensely. But this whole thing is just an improper use of the phrase. What about argue spiritedly for? Well, sure, you could say they have to be able to argue spiritedly for. I mean, they have to argue a lot for, in favor of, meaning argue for the fact that their choice is great. Sure, that actually makes sense. What about contend the spirit of? That's different. Contend is very similar to argue, but when you say contend the spirit of, what this would actually mean is that they're arguing that this choice has a spirit or has some kind of spirit. That's actually not what this is about. This is about they need to argue to defend their choice and argue in a spirited way, meaning argue in a passionate way. Okay? Not argue the passion or argue that the passion exists. What about be argumentative to? All right. Argumentative is different from argue. Argue means you can defend, or you're sort of passionately saying something. Argumentative means more combative, like you're really trying to just get in a fight with someone verbally about something. And this isn't about trying to get into a fight or trying to get into big disagreements over. It's about being able to defend your choices in a passionate way. So the only answer choice that makes sense is B. 12. Once we've found artwork suitable for the covers, editorial production begins. All right, this is another issue where you have this dependent clause, once we've found artwork suitable for the covers. You can just ignore that. And the essential part is you have this subject, production, and begins the verb. Well, why do you have a comma between them? Do I say, the cat, comma, is white? No, I just say the cat is white, right? There's no need to have a comma separating the subject and verb. So, what would you put? Well, this doesn't have that comma. That doesn't have that comma. What's the difference between G and J? Well, production is singular, so the verb has to be singular. This is a singular subject here, but this verb is plural. So G does not work. J would work. What about H? Once we've found artwork suitable for the covers, we begin, comma, editorial production. This is a very similar issue where you have a subject here, you have a verb here. There's no reason to have a comma after the verb, separating the verb from whatever comes after, called a predicate nominative. You don't need to know that term, just know it's whatever comes after that verb. just like you wouldn't say, I began to swim. I wouldn't say I began, comma, to swim. I would just say I began to swim. It's very similar. We begin editorial production. No need to have a comma here. That's why H is wrong. So J is the only answer choice that makes sense. All right, 13. The content, okay, so it says, we plan the contents of the year's issues, page by page. Is there anything wrong with this, the year's issues? No, which issues? The issues belong to the year because it's a triannual magazine, meaning, as it said earlier in the passage, meaning they print every 4 months, 3 times a year. So this is a perfectly formed apostrophe after year because it shows that the issues belongs to the year's work or whatever they're doing. And then comma, page by page, each page by page. This is describing each part of the issue, okay? If you have B, you lose that possessive form, years, which is a problem. C has that same problem, and then D, issues for the year. Well, this is saying issues has something that belongs to it. Could it be the contents of the issues? Well, no. It would need to be contents of the, if it's talking about issues, and it just says straight issues, and it doesn't say years issues, this would need to be plural because there's multiple issues, all right? There's nothing belonging to issues here. And so it's just a plural form that you need to use. So D is wrong. So A is the only answer choice that works. What about 14? Okay. 14, it says, it may snow just after New Year's Day. The first issue is mailed to a typesetter. All right. So if you remember what we said about semicolons, they have to be independent clauses on both sides, and that's the most common error, but they also have to be related. As in, what if I say, you know, David likes books, semicolon, the dog is brown. Well, that wouldn't work. It wouldn't make logical sense to have them separated by a semicolon, even though if you just look at the straight grammar, it would be okay. Like if you put it in Microsoft Word grammar check, it wouldn't detect a thing. So you have that problem. The other problem is that what does having snow just after New Year's Day have to really do with the rest of this, with the rest of this paragraph, which is about the printing process? And it really doesn't. So it's kind of just an irrelevant piece of information, and it doesn't really fit what needs to be put in a sentence that's separated or divided with a semicolon. So no change doesn't work. After what may be a snowy New Year's Day, but not by much, well, isn't that just way, way too wordy? And then, isn't that also just irrelevant? Yeah, it is pretty irrelevant, okay? You don't need to know that it snowed. But H, shortly thereafter New Year's Day, this is actually just incorrect in how you put it. You can say shortly thereafter, but shortly thereafter just by itself. You don't say shortly thereafter something. You can say shortly after New Year's Day, but not shortly thereafter New Year's Day. So this is just incorrect grammatically. And then if you have just after New Year's Day, that's actually straight to the point. You don't have random information about snow and whatever, and it's not worded in in a weird, unnecessary way. It just basically shows a point in time, like this is the time period, then they have to do all this other work, okay? So just after New Year's Day, the first issue is mailed to the typesetter. Okay, so that works. Last question for this passage. Okay, if we go to 15, it says, by this time there's plenty of material for 3 issues. Well, let's get some context. While that issue is being set, we complete the next one's layout. Thus, as soon as an issue comes back from the typesetter for proofreading, the next can go in for typesetting. By this time, there's plenty of material for 3 issues. After the proofreading is done, each issue is sent to a printer. Well, what's this about? The proofreading and the printing. And this is about, the proofreading and typesetting. Why do they need this sentence about how there's a lot of material for 3 issues? Because they're talking about, all right, when we have to proofread it, then we have to get it typeset, then we have to proofread it again, then we need to send it to the printers. That's a description of what they have to do at this time, at the time after New Year's Day, right? After that time period, like in January. This is about, oh, we have so much stuff, we have so much material, we could even make, it's not just for 1 issue, we could actually make 2 issues, or 3 issues, or 4 issues, just with the stuff we have. That is separate from the description of the process that they're actually going through. It's irrelevant detail, okay? So you don't really need it. So look at B, 3 issues where the material has already been selected. There's no grammar issues, but it's basically very similar to A, okay? It's just talking about the amount of stuff. It's not talking about the process of the things they have to do to get that 1 issue printed. And then C, we have chosen materials sufficient for all 3 issues. Again, what really should set you off is that A, B, and C are very, very similar. Also, A, B, and C have no grammatical issues. So if they're all similar, none of them have grammatical issues, logically and grammatically, they're pretty much the same answer choice. So what's the only answer choice that's left? D, that's the only one that's different. And if you omit it, meaning delete it, that whole paragraph actually just reads more smoothly because that whole paragraph will be focused only on that process of proofreading, typesetting, printing, not on we have all this material or on some other random part of the process like we actually got 500 more manuscripts today, which is part of the whole magazine process, but not specific to this one part of the whole printing and, whatever else they do, okay? So that's it for passage 1 of the 3rd practice test. Let's go on to the next passage when you're ready.